Hi, I'm Lenise Brothers, a registered nutritionist, women's health, hormone, and menstrual cycle coach, and the founder of Eat, Love, Move, a nutrition and well-being practice. This is the Period Story podcast, where in each episode, I sit down with a guest to talk about their period story. We get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods and so much more. Now, on to today's guest. On today's episode of Period Story, I'm so pleased to share my conversation with Emma Mainoo, the founder of Surviving Sundays. We had a fantastic conversation about mental health, how to get help if you need it, and how to help anyone around you think may be in need of support. And of course, Emma shared the story of her first period. I can't wait for you to hear this episode. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So
I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here. So let's start off by getting into the story of your first period. Can you share with us what happened?
Yeah, so it's something of a hazy memory now, which is kind of surprising because my periods are always something that are quite memorable, even to this day. I was 14 years old. I remember thinking at the time that I was a late bloomer. I was at an all-girls, very kind of religious Catholic convent school, and everybody kind of led me to believe, I now look back and think, was it true, that they had their period? And I had been so wanting my period because then it meant that I wasn't a little girl anymore. That's kind of like how I thought about it at the time. Like I was just like really wanting to have my period. And at this girls' school, I remember somebody coming in, it might have been a representative from like Tampax or something, giving us tampons. I've got a whole story around that. And there was like, we used to wear these purse belts that we put our change in, like these brown belts, like a zip where you'd put your change. And there was like a holder you could click on to your purse belt that was like in a bright color, like a pink or a yellow. And then you put your tampons into this plastic kind of like holder. And I remember walking around with the holder attached to my purse belt for like ages, like wanting people to think that I already had my period. Little did I know that my period actually would become something that I dreaded, not something that I looked forward to. And as often happens, it came on a day where I was at school and it was summertime, and we used to wear, like, there was the summer and there was the winter uniform. So the summer uniform was like a cotton dress. It was like an orangey gingham check that allowed my period to kind of spread in full flow. And this was something that we often noticed with girls in school. And we might poke fun or be like, oh, alarmed by the sight of this period. And that's what happened to me. That was my first period. So on one hand, I was like, yeah, I've got my period now. But at the same time, like, it was kind of like shock and like embarrassment around it at the time as well.
No, you got your first period when you were at school. What did you do?
I can't really remember. I remember going home and telling my mom and just kind of like having a conversation around, we'd had it before, but like sanitary pads and what was next. But I just remember feeling like really quite messy and quite dirty. I don't remember those years for me at school were really difficult years where I was bullied at that school and ended up changing like in a really important exam year for me. And I do find there was a lot of memories around that time. They're either really, really memorable or I've blocked them out. So I don't remember a lot of like dialogue with girls in class around that time, but I do remember getting it and then like getting like home and being like just wanting to get clean and then using sanitary pads.
Why do you think you associated having your period with this feeling of being unclean?
I don't know. Like, I think it's like there was a smell, there was blood, it was visible, I felt sticky. Like the whole thing to me just was at an age anywhere where your hormones are developing and your body's changing and you've got hair and you're smelling and you're having odors where you didn't really have odors like, a couple of years before. And I just really felt like unclean in that moment. And I guess that's something really that to this day, like I obviously accept the fact and expect the fact that I have a period. But I'm extra kind of hygienic around it. Like, I'm not somebody that, like, I have a relative who embraces and is very kind of like forward thinking when she comes to her period, and she loves it, and all the things that it represents for her. But for me, it is a time where I don't feel particularly like clean, and I want to be extra hygienic.
Okay, so you've carried those feelings
Yeah.
on through your life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned at the beginning that your period was something that you were really looking forward to, and then those feelings changed after you got your period. Can you talk a little bit more around why those feelings changed?
Yeah, I mean, for me, both then and now, my periods are incredibly painful, heavy. They've been quite limiting in terms of, it doesn't matter what protection is out there. And you see all these adverts with people like rollerblading or like dancing, and like you can do everything. Like, that's not been my experience. It's not something that's got better over time. As I've got older, my periods have definitely become heavier. But the pain that's associated with them, I know a lot of people have pain, but for me, there have been times when I've vomited. I've been in quite like careers that have been very performance driven up until recent years. And there've been times where I've been like, feeling like I could be on my deathbed, either mentally or physically, with different things, whether that's tonsillitis, whether that, and I would still work, even if that was working from home. When my period comes, there have been times where that's just not been possible. Like, the pain has been so incredible that I've been like in really awkward positions in my bed, trying to get comfortable, hot water bottles, baths, ibuprofen, like all of it, and just not been able, I had to just like wait for it to like end, to cancel plans. I had even last year, like a really important meeting in the city that I had to be at like 9 a.m. And I woke up at 5 a.m. with like the most incredible pain and nausea. I had to message my colleague and say, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it to this meeting. My period is just so like painful this morning. I feel really sick, and I don't know if I can get there. In the end, I did get there, like after a few hours of doing all the things I know I needed to do. But that has been a big thing for me, the pain.
And what have you done? You've mentioned some of the things that you've done to manage the pain. So hot water bottles, being in certain body positions, painkillers. What have you explored in terms of conversations with doctors about why this pain might be happening for you?
And this is where I tell you that, unless it's been about, like a gynae visit, or I've been to get the contraceptive pill, I've never just been to a doctor and said, this pain is so unbearable. What do I do? It's like it happens. It will happen. I'll get pain for about a week before, the rumblings of pain that tell me it's coming. I'll get it. The day I get it, it's unreal. Maybe the second day it's there, and then it's gone, and it's almost like for a month you're like, okay, that's just what happens. At one point a doctor suggested the contraceptive pill may help with that. It never did, to be completely honest with you. It didn't. And a friend, there's another friend, she and I, like our bond, like our common bond is how bad our periods are. A couple of years ago told me about something she'd heard about which specifically prescribed for pain, but I've never been a big fan of like taking medication unless I needed to. So it's not something I've explored.
Why do you think that you haven't explored it? Because if you've had these situations where you've potentially had to cancel big meetings, you've been vomiting, I just want, sometimes what I've heard one guest say in the past is like she almost has selective memory when it comes to her period, where if for her, she had really bad mood symptoms, and she would get through it, and then it would just be like her mind would just forget until her next menstrual cycle. What do you think it is for you?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that my mood definitely alters. It's really weird, like at this point in my life as well, so many years of having periods, I still get to like this week before, and in a day I feel really sad, like, and then I'll go, oh, it's my period, like it's some big surprise. it's not even selective memory. It's just, I think, a culture of just going, that's what happens. And you chat to your friend, they have period pain too. That's it. And then it's gone, and then it comes back. And it's not consistently been at the level where, I might need to cancel a meeting, but I'm definitely not going to the gym. I'm definitely not doing anything on the day I get my period that's strenuous. And by the evening, it's not an all day, all night. It's probably like, about 5-6 hours of a day. Sometimes, that I would have it from like early morning. And I just kind of go, okay, that's it. It's gone now. And get on with whatever I'm doing.
Where do you think you got this message from that pain is a normal part of having a period?
All around me. I would talk to friends about it and just say my period pain is like unreal, and I would have other friends going, yeah. And I have probably two friends that like really suffer like I do, but everyone would say they had pain. I've never heard anybody go, I don't have any pain. They either have a pain or a really heavy flow, and it's just something that just seems to be like that is what it is.
That's interesting.
That's just all around me. Like, that's always been the conversation. Like, my mum had an early kind of hysterectomy because of like the horrendous like periods that she was experiencing, and it's just something I've accepted as part of like having a period.
That period, having a period means pain.
Yeah.
And a part of my work is looking at these cultural norms that we accept, and it is so common to hear women talk about how much pain they experience. And something I was talking about earlier in the summer was, if you look at all of the, so if you say I have 2 days of period pain every cycle, and let's say you have 12 periods a year, that means that across the year you have 24 days where you're in a lot of pain. And I'd often think that if this was any other condition, we wouldn't necessarily accept it as much as we do with periods, because we've been told that, well, this is normal. People with periods are supposed to feel like this when they're on their period, because that's just what happened. And I just think that if this was any other condition, then it wouldn't be accepted. But so many women have internalized this message that pain is normal. Pain is just it's our lot.
Yeah. And I think like when you get a pain, I completely agree with what you're saying, and I've heard you say that too. And when you see it like that, you're like, wow, yeah. If I had a stabbing pain in my leg for 24 days every year, I'd have dealt with that. But I think because it's almost like what it is, right? The things that I will go to the doctor for are either the unexplained things, or like with my mental health, if I know I need help with that and I could identify it, I will go and see a doctor. With my period, you're kind of going, okay, I understand this. My body, the uterus, I'm shedding some lining, it's pushing through, like I get it. So I'm not frightened by where is this pain coming from. And therefore it's just, I'm able to go, okay, that's what that is. That's what that is. Until in recent years, I must be honest, when I started to think about, becoming a mother, and going to see all the specialists that I've needed to see around those conversations, that's where I've started to get more education, and to understand my fertility more and my periods more and what they represent. Like, that's the place where I've got the most knowledge, but it's because I'm on my own education and fertility journey.
What areas did you feel like you needed to get education around?
I think my education has been very poor. Like, I don't want to like look back and point fingers, but I can give context. So I went to an all-girls school, as I've said, that was, there were other teachers that weren't nuns, but there were a lot of, it was a convent. So the school was led by nuns, the principals, the ethos, a lot of the education, the teachers were taught by nuns. And then I lived in a home where my stepfather was much older than my mother. from quite a traditional background. And my mum, again, was Catholic, but again, from an era where things were like not spoken about really. Definitely sex, reproduction, and hormonal health is just not something that we would talk about in my house. In fact, if you talked about sex, it was something almost shameful. And these labels around being like sin and bad girl versus good girl, and all those things kind of came out of the environment that I was in. I didn't have sisters. And so, feelings like my education around my period came from perhaps magazines, or, we had a reproductive health session in school where we talked about it. But I remember when it came to when I started to socialize with people that weren't at my school, I met other girls, and they would talk about tampons. And I very clearly remember conversations about tampons both in my household and at school, where I was told that if I used a tampon, I would no longer be a virgin in the eyes of the Lord. My hymen would be broken, and I wouldn't be a virgin. And or this kind of inference that it was a sexualized thing to have a tampon. So again, even though they're going, okay, use sanitary pads because that is like a kind of a more acceptable thing, it still clouds the whole subject in this kind of, it's not a safe or open thing that we talk about and explore options around. If that makes sense to you.
And also to this conflating the idea of periods and sex and making the tampon seem like a sexual thing, it adds that additional level of shame.
Yeah, and we had somebody for sure come in as a representative from like a Tampax or whatever, because I remember having this tampons given to us, but then whether that was kind of like a school like teacher thing versus a convent thing, because I remember having going into sick bay is a memory I have quite clearly, because my periods were quite bad and painful. There was a thing, I don't know if they still have this in school, called sick bay, right? Where you would go, there was a nun in there, Sister Dolores, she was really sweet, and there were like bunk beds in there and a radiator, and I would often be going into their bunk beds, going into these big feathery duvets, putting my back, I remember my bottom against the hot radiator just to like try and beat this pain. But also, just saying like, my period's so bad, and like having these conversations with a couple of nuns around the fact that, tampons were like, we shouldn't be using them. And also at home, that was a message that was kind of like supported as well. So, this idea that vagina is period and it is sex means that actually my sexual organs weren't something that I kind of got familiar with until my 20s, really.
It's amazing to me that you had the school telling you that tampons weren't something to be used because they were connected with sex. I just think that's just unbelievable. Well, it isn't unbelievable because you hear all these stories about different things that people learn about their bodies, and how, there's just this miseducation that happens so often. So as you got older, you left school, and you continued to have these painful periods, and this trouble with menstruation. How did you explore what was happening to you?
I didn't. It's just something that became, for me, like I knew that I would have some downtime every time that my period came. I remember a girlfriend that I'd become quite close to. She was at boarding school, and she was so fun. And like, we used to hang out when she came back. Like, she was the person that said to me, just use a tampon. Like, I used them. And I remember she coached me. She was sat outside. We were on a weekend in Wales. I think we'd gone with my parents and they'd gone out. and she bought me these Tampax Mini, which I don't really see anymore, and I would never be using now, but like these mini ones, because I couldn't get a regular tampon in because I was just so anxious. And she was outside the bathroom door as I was like in the bathroom with like my foot up on the bath, and she was like coaching me through using this tampon because I was so anxious, because obviously this was like a naughty thing to be doing. I think I must have been, if I was friends with her, I think I met her around about the age of being 16, 17. So, I kind of like grew up with this friend. She kind of taught me things about sex and periods that I wasn't supposed to know, obviously. And that was it. Like, in terms of education and exploring periods, I don't think I'm alone in just knowing that these are just things that happen to us and we just get on. I know that's an awful thing to say, but like the pain, the bleeding, that was just it. Like, I didn't explore it. Like, I'm 41. Not a lot of people realize that. Some people think I look younger than I am. So I'm 41, I'm 42 this year. There wasn't an internet of things then that we went into. There weren't Instagrammers. You got this Smash Hits magazine. Maybe you got Just 17 or whatever it was. And there'd be things in there. But there wasn't a world of information then. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was something you don't talk about. That was certainly my experience.
And it's interesting if you compare what you've just been saying about, you didn't talk about these things with actually the work that you do now around mental health, and how there's this greater openness around mental health, and more people are willing to talk about their mental health struggles, whether it's anxiety, depression, or, anything beyond that. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about your step into this area. I know on your website you have a post where you talk about why you started Surviving Sundays. But could you just talk a little bit more about that for listeners who aren't familiar with your story?
Yeah. So firstly, I think just to talk about like the name Surviving Sundays, I don't know if people kind of go there thinking it's about hangovers, maybe. And also because today I also talk about sobriety. But Sunday for me was once the worst day of the week. And that wasn't just about like workload. It was because I was in recovery from a breakdown that I'd experienced. And Sunday represented a day where I'd either spent the day alone because I just couldn't face being the third wheel with my couple friends, or the fifth wheel if they had kids, or even just hanging out with friends who were like on their own and just thriving. Like, life was just really like difficult. And I knew that I was going into the office on Monday morning. I worked for a really friendly company then. I was kind of hiding what I'd been through. And I knew people would ask me how I felt at the tea point, and I would say fine and just try and move the conversation on. So Surviving Sundays represents to me a journey what I went on to make Sundays, and in fact weekends, something sacred. And now that journey and that connection between what was once my worst thing becoming now my best thing. Like, Sundays are my most favorite. I hear people saying they hate Sunday. I love Sunday. Like, I love Sundays, and I'm protective of them. So that's Surviving Sundays is about the journey that I went on. But also, it's not just about me. It's a space where I came forward and said, look, I had a breakdown. I had a breakdown in 2012. I came forward, told my story, and I've now created a place where other people can share theirs. But like, the potted story is that I spent around 20 years of my career working in marketing, whether that's media or PR, or marketing. I worked in that area, and anyone who works in that world knows that it is performance driven, that it is, you're not just kind of like delivering the work, whatever that may be, you're performing yourself. Like, it's all about engaging clients, engaging hearts and minds through the work that you're doing. And that meant me working hard, but also playing hard. And what I didn't know, because I didn't have the emotional language then, or the education, was that probably I can identify now, like, my first mental health problems beginning about the age of 14. I'd had some difficult years in my formative years and in my school years, and this manifested in me, feeling incredibly unhappy, very, very anxious. I then might have just said I was a worrier, but I was worrying about big stuff, and I was thinking about ways to not be here anymore and ways to harm myself, to not go to school, to not feel the way that I did. and I controlled my food. Like that was the thing that I did, that made me feel like I had some sense of control. That was my only thing. And I ran away from that girl for about 20 years, like, through toxic relationships that kept me distracted from the work on myself, through work, achievement. Work was the place where I knew that I was doing something good because I was, a people pleaser. I threw myself at something and I would achieve. And also through going out and like playing, that happens in that world. And I thrived on all fronts. But ultimately, I was just suppressing feelings that need to be addressed. And 20 years later, age 34, a breakup that was unexpected in a very serious relationship led to a breakdown. And it wasn't just about that relationship. It was literally 20 years of demons, switch being flicked, and everything coming to me in one moment that I tried to run away from. So I had a breakdown. I was out of work for 3 months. And it meant that when I went into my new job, people there didn't know me. They didn't know what I'd been through. They didn't know that I was recovering from a breakdown, and I could hide again, which I did for a number of years. So Surviving Sundays was the place where 2.5 years ago, I came out really and just said, I have had a debilitating breakdown. I was in recovery mode when I stood on the door at 10 Downing Street on an impressive project that to all the world looked like I was like just killing it, and I felt like I was dying inside. I was dying inside on Instagram, and I was high kicking my way through, members clubs and bars and parties in Ibiza and all of that, and I just wanted to create a very normal dialogue around what mental health problems can look like and tell my story and be authentic. So that's what I've done, because I felt so incredibly alone, and I was tired of feeling that way and ashamed of the feelings that I had. So that's why I came out and told my story.
So having worked in media and marketing as well, so I kind of connect with what you're saying around it being a job that's very much about an industry that's very much about performance. You perform for your clients. You have to be yourself. You have to be on all the time because, God forbid your client doesn't see you at your best. The drinking, the partying, the dinners, the jollies, all of it. And it's exhausting. And I don't think, sure, I think it's changed in the last couple of years, but to say that you were depressed or anxious, in the time that I was working in media, it's just not a conversation that you would have. And I have seen changes. I don't work in that industry anymore, but I have seen changes over the last couple of years in terms of in the trade press and what my friends who still work in the industry talk about. But I just want to talk a little bit more about, you felt like you had to hide it because you had to perform. And I think that people listening who are experiencing the same thing would connect with that. And what would you say to someone who is in the same position and, just going through a real turmoil inside, but feeling like they're at their breaking point?
I would say that a lot of the reason I didn't reach out when I look back now wasn't necessarily because of the perceptions of me that others held. It was me not wanting to acknowledge my problems and having an internalized shame around my feelings. When I did have a conversation at some point with one of my bosses in my media agency, he was so kind, so supportive, and recommended, that I went and spoke to somebody, which I did. But then knowing that I had, a great healthcare plan, I was still frightened of having therapy through my work plan because I felt like people might know that it was far more of a serious thing, and I didn't want to be seen to not do my job. I know that it's confidential now, obviously. I think at the time I did, but I just didn't trust it enough. And I think that the change for me has been, I had a breakdown. It doesn't mean that I don't have mental health challenges now. And we all have mental health, so we can all have mental health challenges. Depression and anxiety aren't just things that happen to those other people out there, whoever those other people might be. We can all be at risk of it. And I think we're all experiencing it as a result of the pandemic that we're going through and the crises and conversations around racism, everybody's anxious. But I think, saying reach out is a really big thing to ask of people. Reach out at work. You might not be ready to do that, but what I would say is reach out to someone. And that someone may be a therapist. That someone may be a trusted friend. I really would recommend, if it's within your capability, and I say that because I know that therapy can be expensive, although there are more providers and solutions coming along that are better, to get some professional support has been the most life-defining and life-changing thing that I ever did. A friend can hold space for you. A friend can hear you. But friends can become exhausted and also not have the answers or the skills to support you in the right way. So I would say get honest with yourself. If you're having days, multiple days, where you're feeling really low and life feels pointless and you feel hopeless, that is not to be ignored by going out and just going, okay, that's how I feel, going out and drinking or working harder, or, get honest with yourself is the first thing I would say, and find the help that you need. I don't believe in people preaching to you that, if you're drinking too much, stop drinking immediately. You've got to do things in your own time, in your own way. So that's what I would say.
Find the help that you need. What are some resources that someone who feels that they are ready to seek that first step of help, what are some resources that they can access?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that it's been a great comfort to me, and it still is today, to find myself in the stories of others. That might be the first place that you start. So if you have a problem with alcohol, you don't need to be an alcoholic. That's such a myth. Alcoholics Anonymous is there for people who define themselves as alcoholics. That is true. And there is a thing around admission of that. But you might go and sit in a room where people reflect your experiences, whether that's eating, whether that's codependency. I went to a help group for some of my codependent behaviors. It might be AA. It might be, some of these sober circles that are coming up. It might be a mental health support group. It might be blogs. Places like Mind, the Mind website, I think is phenomenal. It has an A to Z, a comprehensive A to Z guide of all the different mental health conditions that people might experience, plus a blog where stories are shared. Surviving Sundays, I'm not plugging it because it doesn't make me any money. It's not there to make me famous. It's there because stories are shared with the hope that somebody might read them and go, wow, that reflects my experience. So leaning into spaces where you might be seen is a great place to start. That could be that you follow an influencer that kind of speaks your language on a topic. That could be a really good place to start. The other thing that I would say is not to be afraid, especially if you're starting to experience suicidal thoughts, of reaching out. The Samaritans is there for a reason. It's a confidential support service with highly trained people who are really warm, really empathetic, who can hear you. There are great services like the Samaritans that are there to support people. So looking into organizations where you can start to have a conversation about the way that you feel by people that might be able to listen and support you.
And what about the flip side of it, where you might have someone in your life who you can see that there's an issue, but they might be kind of putting on that facade where, you on your blog, you use the term high kicking their way through life on Instagram. That might be what they're doing, high kicking their way through life. But that you can see that there's something going on. What would you say to someone who is in that position? How can they have a really sensitive, tender conversation with someone in their life who hasn't actually acknowledged that there might be an issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'm often in this position now, both as a friend and as a teacher. So in my day-to-day life, my whole work life has changed now. I'm now a head of mental health at a culture change business called Utopia, where we work with clients every day, teaching employees how to have supportive conversations with each other. And the first thing I will say is the most important thing that you can go into any conversation with is a lack of judgment and a willingness to listen. We so often think when we go into a conversation about what we're going to say next. Like, we're hearing, we're not actually listening. We're thinking about the next smart thing we're going to say, the facts we can give, the experience we've had that's similar to theirs, what they should do, rather than actually just going into a conversation and saying, how are you feeling? And sitting and listening, even when it's uncomfortable for us. Like, the reason we want to fix things often is so we don't want our friend to be in pain, and it makes us feel uncomfortable. Now, sometimes what somebody needs is simply to be held and to be seen. And we can do that by saying, thank you for sharing that with me. That's really, really tough. And I appreciate you sharing that with me. How can I help? Rather than saying, you'll be fine. It's okay. You'll get through this. Like, we want to be positive. We want to encourage hope and positivity, but sometimes we can shut people down if that's all they're hearing from us. If 90% of the message is, you'll get through this, or what I did when I was depressed was this, the conversation then isn't about them. So really just being prepared to listen rather than doling out advice and judging and trying to fix is one of the simplest things that we can do. But honestly, I'm also aware of the fact that often people don't have the tools or experience to support people with mental health problems. More support is needed. So that's where things like mental health first aid come in and are really valuable. I teach that course. It's a course where people are taught how to spot the signs of poor mental health, but also it's all about signposting, knowing when the time is to not try and be a therapist, just say, okay, this, and this resource could be really, really good for you, and trying to guide that person towards the help that they need.
Talk a little bit about being a mental health first aider, because I had never heard of that before. So if someone's interested in that and exploring that kind of training, talk a little bit more about what it is.
Yeah. So mental health first aid is like 13 years old now. It originated in Australia. But it's been in the UK since I think about the last 5 years. And really it came about because the creators of it realized that, if you had an injury in the workplace now, if you fell over, if you had heart pains, if if anything happened, you're going to have a first aider in your business as a legal requirement who knows how to put a plaster on you, or how to call for emergency help, and how to preserve your life until professional help arrives. The reality is, and statistics show, you're far more likely to connect with somebody that's experiencing a mental health problem than you are somebody who is having a heart attack. And so mental health first aid came about as a training course that could help people to learn to spot the signs of things like depression and anxiety. We even explore psychosis, eating disorders, self-harm. And not so that they can diagnose, but so that they have some awareness, and so that they can then preserve life, talk and support somebody who's having, let's for example, psychosis or a panic attack, and help them get to professional help. So it used to be a 2-day course in a classroom. That has now changed at the moment because of current circumstances. And it's now an online course, which is 2 hours, 4 2-hour sessions and some homework. And I teach this each week alongside the brilliant courses that I teach that we do at Utopia, because mental health first aid isn't for everyone. Like, in some organizations, they like people to do it, to have first aiders in the business. But really, deeper, strategic, more kind of influential courses need to happen that mean the workplace isn't a place where you might need so many mental health first aiders. And that's kind of the work that I do with Utopia. But mental health first aid is a really great course for people to come on to learn some skills so they can support others and also be more mindful of their own well-being.
Where can they contact you to find out about going on one of these courses?
Great. So you can contact me about, any kind of like mental health questions or submissions, I'm always looking for people to write for Surviving Sundays and share their story. Or if you've got inquiries about mental health first aid, you can contact me by email via hello@survivingsundays.com. You can check us out on Instagram at surviving_Sundays, or visit the website as well. As some information on there about MHFA, Mental Health First Aid, which is survivingsundays.com.
And if listeners were to take one thing from everything you've shared in our conversation, what would you want that to be?
I would just say, like, on this topic of periods, like, there's a connection to the way that I felt about my mental health and the way that I felt about who I was for a long time. And that thread is shame. Decisions, relationships, most of the things that I did were guided by shame and the fear of being discovered or seen for who I really was. And I would just say that, now the decisions I made are based on kind of like my hopes and dreams, not my fears around shame. And I think that, just getting good with who you are and getting honest with who you are, and accepting that if you need help, that's not a shameful thing. It's a strong and courageous thing to reach out and acknowledge that and get the help that you need. That's a wonderful thing.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Emma. It's been so wonderful to hear your story and to have a conversation with you.
Thank you, Lenise. Thanks for having me. And, I've got to say, beyond my best friends, I don't really talk about my period. So it's good to talk about it with you, and I look forward to kind of knowing you more and following you more and getting more education from you around something that I certainly am open to getting support with.
For more inspiring conversations, head over to periodstorypod.com, where we have so many more for you to peruse. If you want help with your menstrual or hormone health, email me on hello@eatlovemove.com to set up a free 30-minute hormone health review. If you like today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Tag us, come say hi, and send in your requests for who you'd like to see on the show on Instagram and Twitter on @periodstorypod, or email us at hello@periodstorypod.com. I'm Lenise Brothers, and you've been listening to Period Story. Thank you so much for listening.